Hi, welcome back. This is Carrie.
And I'm Summer, and we are Hypoxia Podcast, and we are back today for Honest History with Leo, our favorite historian.
I don't know what to introduce this episode as, because we've just been bullshitting for the last 50 minutes.
Okay, so what are we going to talk about, Leo? What are we going to talk about? History.
We have to talk about like Queen Elizabeth II and her passing and what that means for people. What is it, like the 21st anniversary or remembrance of 9/11? We've got Indigenous Peoples Day coming up in October. We've got the Iranian women revolting.
Mm-hmm.
We've got Hispanic Heritage Month going on right now. And we've also got, white people flipping out over the Little Mermaid because she's not supposed to be black. That is, and oh yeah, and then like the little elves and whatever new Game of Thrones show or whatever is, like they got black people in that, and white people are freaking out too.
I don't even have words. Like the levels of absurdity of people being upset about a mermaid and elves.
Like, it's an elf in Lord of the Rings. Like
how racist do you have to be?
That's the thing. That is literally the thing. Like if we can't even get into like fantasy and sci-fi stuff, like we don't have a shot in the real world if we can't even get into the fake stuff.
Right,
people flipping out.
The Little Mermaid is supposed to be what, like a Scandinavian French something.
I mean, it was written by some English dude, but I think even in the original The Little Mermaid, like she was green. But of course, I mean, Disney gets a hold of it and turns her into a white girl with red hair and name her Ariel, and voila! Now all of a sudden, white people think that they own the rights to that. I mean, but we've seen it like in other films and stuff like that too. Like a couple years ago, when Michael B. Jordan was rumored to be playing the new Superman, and people freaked out because Superman's not supposed to be black; he's supposed to be white, even though he's an alien. Or 007 when Idris Elba was rumored to be up for the role or whatever else. And people freaked out about that because 007 is supposed to be white, even though it's not like black people aren't British and live in England and whatever.
And also 007 is just a moniker. Like it's not even
it's not one person. Like
it's
the name that is given to that agent, which can be anybody. I mean, do people freak out over Doctor Who because they change that one every few years, don't they? I've never seen an episode, so I wouldn't know. But
I haven't watched it, but I know there have been both men and women, and it's changed a lot.
There's been one woman doctor, and people were pissed.
Were they? I'm very far outside of that universe. I have no idea.
I love Doctor Who. I stopped watching because I didn't like a choice of an actor they used for one of the doctors, but that has nothing to do with like anything. I didn't like him.
Wait, has there ever been a black Doctor Who?
I think the newest Doctor, I haven't kept up with it, but I think the newest Doctor was supposed to be
not white.
Not white. I don't remember.
I'm trying to Google to see if I can find out who will have been the doctors.
Or like another, like anything that's not a white man. I can't remember. I haven't kept up with it so long just because I stopped watching. But
images.
Here's an image with all of the doctors there have been, and they are all white.
Yeah.
Up through the woman. Have they had a new doctor since the woman? I don't know.
There's supposed to be a new one after her.
Okay, that person's not on this graphic, so I don't know.
Mm-mm. But it's amazing, like what people are willing to like stick to. Mm-hmm. Like God forbid, like there's ever any change, but yet and still we expect like our society to end up any better than what it's always been when we can't even get like decent shit on TV.
And it's funny,
right? But you have to remember the people who are resistant to that change. They don't want what we see as better. They see that as worse.
It's really funny with like Doctor Who, just for like that example, because we were just talking about it. One of the main villains went from being a white man to a white woman, and everybody loved it because they wanted to villainize her. But when it was good guy turned into a woman, they hated it because it was supposed to be a white man. So
Yeah, but it seems like it's a through line with all this stuff. I mean, there's this obsession with like sticking to canon, whether we're talking about, you know, the classic books that should always be taught, and God forbid we move away from those because we've always got to teach, you know, what Of Mice and Men. We've always got to teach. Oh my God, what's the other one? Atticus Finch. What's that one? Is that one of?
Mockingbird?
Yes, To Kill a Mockingbird.
You have To Kill a Mockingbird. We've always got to teach Romeo and Juliet. Like there's this weird canon that we've always stuck to, which was created at a time when, you know, black folks and brown folks were not equal. And then now that we are trying to move into a different realm of society, like people are literally like clutching their pearls and fighting tooth and nail and willing to die on the hill of like these very problematic books, because at the end of the day, they just want things to stay the same.
I also take issue with teaching Shakespeare and Chaucer without any context. There's no historical context. Therefore, every important statement in the work is completely lost on the student.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's just miserable. So what's the fucking point?
Yeah. But so many parents are like, well, I learned that stuff and I ended up fine, so my kids should be able to learn that stuff too. And they're god awfully afraid that like if their kids learn anything different, that they're either not going to be successful or they're afraid of what they're going to learn. And my question is like, what are you so afraid of? Are you afraid of your kids coming home and asking you questions, or, you know, holding you accountable for stuff, or them seeing like how flawed your upbringing and how flawed your ideals are? I mean,
that's
what
it is.
Yeah.
That's how my grandparents were. Like, the minute I came home just like slightly more progressive after like freshman year, lost their shit. And it was just because I read different books and talked to different people and learned new things. Lost their shit.
Yeah. It's constantly people that are around them have to, you know, sit up there and put up with whatever they've dealt with or whatever else for decades, centuries, whatever else. But the moment we want just an itty bitty chance of change, it's time to flip out and go crazy and go nuts and die on that hill of fictional books and, you know, fictional TV characters and fictional movie characters, whatever else. Like, damn, if y'all are willing to hold on and fight tooth and nail for stuff like this, again, like, we know what you're willing to do for like real life stuff, and that shit is scary.
Mm-hmm. I mean, speaking of fighting for fiction, the Resistance to Indigenous Peoples Day is this month, and I helped organize Indigenous Peoples Day in Oklahoma City, right? And we took it before City Council 3 different years. It failed. It has never been passed as a resolution, as a permanent observation in Oklahoma City. The mayor just makes a proclamation every year. So if he is not mayor at some point, it may not. So anyhow, so we have ongoing conversations about trying to make this a resolution, and we still hear the same arguments. Columbus discovering America. No. Just like the idea that either what he did, the things he did weren't so bad, or he didn't know they were bad, which is historically not even fucking true.
Yeah.
But like they will.
Also, you don't think murdering people isn't bad? Like,
exactly. Like they act like people didn't know that 500 years ago. Like there have always been people that knew that was wrong. Yeah. I'd imagine Christopher Columbus knew that was wrong too. There's a difference. He just didn't care. And not to mention, like, we only hear about like him in 1492. We don't hear about the other voyages that he took to the quote unquote New World and the horrible shit that he did, to the fact that like, to the point that like when he went back to Europe, like he was imprisoned. Like he wasn't in prison because he was doing all the right stuff. I mean, for a guy of that stature and of that fame, of whatever, of that importance, which even back then they knew the stuff he was doing was important, for them to go ahead and put him in jail, like that says enough for the shit that he did. He was a horrible human being. Like, and there's no way around that. There's no way you can cut off people's ears or, you know, let the Tainu play with the sharp ends of your sword because they technically didn't know any better, or cut off their noses and think like, damn, like, this is actually totally okay. We've always done this. This is great. Like, people knew right from wrong. And that's my part that I have the biggest issue with, even when it comes to like teaching a more authentic history. Like, what are people so afraid of? Like, because when you go ahead and tell a more authentic like idea of history, like it allows people the opportunity to know that there was better out there. Like when you don't talk about enslavement, that means that you're also not talking about white folks that thought that it was wrong, and the abolitionists that fought and died for that sort of stuff, or the white teachers that taught black kids purposely knowing what could happen to them. Like we're not trying to train white kids to be ashamed of their past. We're actually trying to, hope that they understand like that there were decent white folks out there that were trying to do some decent things too. Like what the hell are y'all afraid of?
Well, you see, if little Becky sees everyone is equally human, she might bring a black boy home for dinner, and we can't have that.
And that's the other part. Because we can't have that.
Mm-hmm. I still remember when I was in high school, I overheard the father of a boy that I went to high school with tell his son, "You can fuck her, but you can't bring her home to your mom." So when people when people try to tell me there are still people, that people don't have a objection to interracial relationships, I'm like, you guys are insane. Because, I mean, my beige ass was a problem for them. What about literally all the other people who,
My family did that also. Like, they literally told me that I can only date like white people, and my grandparents said that as an interracial couple. My grandpa is half and my grandma is white. Like,
wow.
And it was.
But that speaks to like how far gone we are, how deep and insidious that like colonization and white supremacy is. That like we really believe that having whiter skin makes you a better form of human being, which is just it's trash. And the thing is like there's enough scholarship and there's enough information out there to know better, but we decide that like the social ramifications of it are more important than anything else. And it's why we struggle as a people just in general. Like we are not very educated. We don't trust or believe in a lot of science, and it shows all the time because we would rather deal in the social implications of everything instead of, the actual truth of it all.
I think for him, it was like a lot of the internalized racism because he was from a really small town in southern Oklahoma that was all white, basically. And so I think it just like affected him like that deeply to where he like projected that onto like all of us. Like, if you're not white, like, there's something wrong with you. And
Yeah, but that's how we get to like Queen Elizabeth II, like the whiteness that she's able to project over 70 years on the throne, and she passes away at the ripe old age of 96, which I wish everybody could die peacefully at home at 96. Like that'd be great. But when it comes to the people all over the world mourning her, like they're mourning her simply because of her status and simply because of her skin color. Like they're not mourning her because she was a decent person, because we don't know if she was or was not, but we do know the position that she held, and we do know, the position that her country held, and the history of her country and how she plays a big part in that. But that's the reason why people mourn her. If that had been a black person that was on the throne for 70 years, who was leading the largest colonial empire in the history of the world, like we would say good riddance and thank God. But we're not supposed to talk ill of the dead, and we're not ready to have those conversations yet because it's always too soon. But like, when are we ever supposed to have those? Like in the
they never want us to.
Oh, never. But that's the whole point. It's to waste time and delay and push off and push off and push off. And by the time the next thing happens, like, oh, it's too soon to talk about that one also. Like we see with school shootings all the time. Like we're not supposed to talk about school shootings and talk about the laws and all that other stuff because, we got to have good time to mourn the dead. And then guess what? By the next week, there's another one happening and we're going to go ahead and get pissed off about, where people are going to say, hey, not now, not yet, but when. And, time is never on the side of the people that are being oppressed and all the people that are being marginalized. It's just not the way that it works, which is why we have to constantly push and force. But then we also get labeled as being, inappropriate, rude, unprofessional, mean people, and all that other stuff. And it's just the same cycle that continues on and on. And like I remember, I mean, I think Queen Elizabeth died at like around 10:30 in the morning at some point in time, like where I'm at in LA. And I had the next class coming in about 10 or 15 minutes. And kids were shocked, like, oh my God, like she's dead. And I'm like, she's 96. Like it was gonna happen at some point in time. Like, granted, we know that she's been on the throne for 70 years, but like it had to happen. It had to. Like, that's the way that it goes. But I put up a map for them, and it showed like all the different countries in the world that have been colonized by the British in the years in which they gained their independence. And I think the number is around 65 or 66. And so I asked them, like, do they know what the most widely celebrated holiday in the world is? And they guessed a bunch of other different things. But like the most widely celebrated holiday in the world is independence from Britain. Like those 65 countries divided by 365 days a year basically averages out to like 1 every 6 days a country should be celebrating its independence from Britain. Like that's crazy. Not to mention there's another 14 territories that Britain still owns right now till this day. And I mean, and a lot of those countries that got their independence, that earned their independence, happened during Queen Elizabeth's reign. And that wasn't because she was nice and wanted them to be free. It's because the British Empire realized that with all these countries demanding their freedom, they couldn't possibly keep them all down, so they let them all go. But that's what they did. They took everything they needed from them, let them go, and there's a reason why a lot of those countries are struggling today. It's not because they don't know how to lead. It's because, they've got nothing to lead with. They've got no resources. They've always had somebody else, being a police state over them and whatnot. And the other argument that I hear from other people online is that, like, she didn't really have any real authority and she didn't have any real power. And that's true, but she's still the Queen of England. She still has influence. You never hear any, videos or recordings of her saying that, what the British have done is wrong. None whatsoever. So, like, if you don't mind profiting from it, then you're just as bad as the people that were actually making those decisions. Like, you've made a living off of it. There's a reason why the Queen of England was worth $500 million. She got to pass it off to her son Charles, tax free, no doubt, because she made sure that she was exempt from having to do that inheritance tax thing. So he got to take over all of that whatsoever. And this is where we are. And now we are arguing over some lady in her worth to the world, and people don't understand, like, how come some people are not mourning the way that they are with the Queen's death, which is also crazy to me because, like, people in America are doing that. Like, the British colonized America, and y'all are sitting up here, like, sympathizing with them and getting mad at folks here in America who do not feel the same way as you do. Like, that's crazy. Crazy talk. But this is where we are with everything, all the time. Never fails.
I mean, I think the outpouring of, the huge display of grief at her death is indicative of how much influence she had. And so her silence or even support of atrocities through the years, there's no legitimate way to say she didn't affect anything.
Exactly. Or people talking about, like, not celebrating somebody's death and how rude that is. And she had people that loved her. Yeah, I'm sure that she did. And there was also a lot of people out there that couldn't stand her and what she represented. And we have to be okay with that too. Like, I didn't see anybody, like, getting mad at folks who were mourning her death at the same way that people who were mourning her death got mad at people who were not. And to me, like, we talk about not celebrating death in this country. That's all we've ever done is celebrate death. I mean, we celebrate Thanksgiving because of the extermination of indigenous folks, and we celebrate independence because of the killing of enslaved Black folks and of the British, the British again. But those are things that we celebrate. We celebrate death all the time. People celebrated the lynching of Black folks and pre-Civil War and even up until the early 20th century. Like, people celebrate that shit all the time. And God forbid a Black or brown person dies on TV somewhere at the hands of the cops or whatever, then, they got what they deserved. And we basically celebrate that shit too. But it's just always amazing the lengths that people will go in order to try to keep, whatever semblance of power they think that they have or they think that they should have. Like, don't give me the whole morals part. Don't act as if, we should all feel the same way that you do, because we all have a different experience. And I'm not going to blame or fault anybody that wants to cry over her death. And at the same time, don't blame me because I don't give a damn.
I agree. I hate like the argument of like she had people that loved her, like so did Hitler. Like he had people that loved him and people that supported him, and we celebrate like his death. Like
Yeah.
can't we speak ill of the dead if they were shit people?
Yep. Exactly. And not to mention, I mean, we also celebrate, Columbus Day. And what does Columbus represent? Not the founding of America. Like, we know what he did, but we celebrate the hell out of that
genocide.
Day. Yeah, but we don't want to let that day go either. But no, we shouldn't celebrate the death of anybody. But we celebrate all those holidays, which are just death.
Oh. Speaking of death, you mentioned 9/11.
Yeah.
How many years is it again?
It is 21 now.
Yep.
Yeah, 21. Just saying, I mean, those kids that were born that year are now able to drink. That's insane.
I wasn't.
Don't say that. My son was like only a few months old. Like I was holding him when I was watching the second plane go into the tower live on the news. Now he's a grown man.
Exactly. Now we can have a beer.
He feels so old.
That happened.
You were what?
I was in like I was in second grade.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You're such a baby.
Thanks.
Are you able to drink now, Carrie, or no? You're in the first grade. That's crazy.
12 years. So.
Oh my god. You were like 6. That's insane.
I was 8. Wow. I was born in 94.
Oh my god.
No, I would have.
I'm traumatized now. Thank you, Carrie.
How did you just realize that?
Every time you remind me of this, it just makes me feel. I am almost old enough to be her mom.
I mean, I remember 1994 like clearly.
I don't.
Yeah. But,
it's fine. Add millennial zest to your life. I think I'm like right on the edge of like millennial and like Gen Z. Like right on that edge. Because I still remember like my childhood, like I still played outside and didn't have like a cell phone or like electronics or anything until like middle school.
Okay, how old were you when you got your first cell phone?
I was 12 or 13 and I had one of those like Nokia ones.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, my first cell phone was I was a freshman in college, and it was one of those like StarTAC flip ones that like you couldn't leave on all day because it would just drain the battery. So you only had it in case you wanted to make a call, but not to receive a call.
I had like a Nokia.
And only after 9 o'clock, because before that, the minutes cost too much.
Per minutes, yeah.
I had a Nokia track phone, and I only had it because I was doing after school stuff to call home and tell them I need to be picked up.
Jesus, my God. Oh.
Okay, so what year were you born again?
94.
Yeah, you are close to the edge on the millennials. I guess that ends in 96.
I'm 28. Just
A baby.
I'm just a baby. Do you get on TikTok like at all, like for fun videos? So do you get on TikTok like at all for like fun videos, or do you just watch?
Yeah.
Because I mention a lot of like TikTok like references, and most of the time Summer doesn't get them.
She has to send me a lot of TikTok videos.
I have a really bad habit of like hearing a TikTok sound and then just repeating it like a parrot for a month. It's fine.
She's got a Pavlovian response to TikTok. Wow.
Like when social medias were like starting and like with YouTube, like I was attached to the internet from like when YouTube started in like 2006.
Oh my God.
So
Okay, do you remember life before 9/11?
a little, not like a whole bunch. Like I remember because I was since I was 8. Like we were living in Texas at the time, and I remember like going outside to like play in the neighborhood with like the other kids and like riding my bike and stuff like that. But I remember a lot of my childhood, so I don't feel like I'm a good gauge.
So you don't remember life before regular school shootings, really, do you?
Yeah, because what Columbine was what, 99 or 2000?
99.
Yeah.
I remember being at school and being like little, and we had to do like drive-by like practices, like to hide, because people would always like threaten to do like the drive-bys. Like they wouldn't come like in the school, but they would threaten to do that. And the school that I was at was pretty small. I went to like a smaller school in town, but like all of the buildings were like really close to the road, and like if you like just drove down the road, like you could shoot and hit almost every building into the classrooms. And so we had to do like drive-by practices.
Yeah, like it's I mean, it's amazing, like in that couple of years, like how much life changed. Like there's always, like, I think every generation has like that certain event or that certain date where something happens and you distinctly remember what life was like before that and what life was like afterwards. Like I know, like, in telling my students, like, I like when it comes to my parents, like they remember where they were when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and like for my mom particularly, and they remember where they were when JFK was assassinated, and then my mom remembers particularly where she was when she found out that like Elvis Presley died, and then for us, like we've got, I mean, I remember, you know, life in school before Columbine and what it's turned into afterwards. Like I was in school and never had to worry about a school shooting. That's not something that we ever talked about, or, you know, not a drill that we ever had to do. And now, like, every school in America does at least a couple of those every year. I mean, we all have lockdown protocols, which is ridiculous. And then the other one, like 9/11. Like, I mean, obviously, like the students I teach were, I think they were -6 when 9/11 happened. So like they've only
Right.
lived in a 9/11 world. But like asking them to go home and ask their parents and their grandparents and other home adults like what life was like before that, it was a totally different world back then. Just, I mean, and not just air travel, but like I was telling them, it's crazy that y'all have only known what it's like to have to get to an airport 2 hours before a plane takes off, or you know, to have to take off your shoes when you're going through security. The fact that there is even security, like there was none of that stuff back then when I was a kid. Like we just got dropped off, walked on through, and we're there to go, and could give mom and dad a hug and kiss before you hopped on a plane, and they could stay there and watch your plane take off. And there's just none of that now. And
right, you watch movies from that time period before, and none of the airport scenes make sense because there's like running to the, you know, the visitors running to the gate with you and all of this. Like none of it.
It was really like, because my parents live in Florida, and so I was with them during the summer, and I always like remembered having to have like my grandma, like she would have to stop like before, like she would have to buy like a whole ticket to be able to go to the gate with me to sit with me, and I was like 13. It wasn't just like allowed.
Yeah,
Which
3-ounce bottles of like liquid that you could take with you on the plane because we're ridiculous and like yeah.
And for us being in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma City bombing was the same too. Like everything changed. I remember sitting in class, and we happened to be the first class at the end of the hallway. The principal heard the alert on the radio, and he came and told us. And of course, they didn't have any information yet, just that there was some sort of explosion in downtown. And he was going like I thought the man was going to pass out. He had like all the blood had run, you know, left his face. It was awful. And then, you know, but a lot of people had family members that worked up in downtown. You know, you would commute to Oklahoma City, and that, you know, Waco had just happened a couple years before. And then that not only changed things in Oklahoma as far as it did change a lot of like the way security happened in Oklahoma City itself, but that was the beginning of the huge militarization within like the evangelical community and things like that. And when, you know, the preppers really started ramping up, and that has not stopped. So like gun culture ballooned enormously, and the paranoia that still remains, a lot of the like we're still seeing a lot of political fallout from that.
I just, like a recovered memory talking about like the preppers. I guess I had forgotten about it, but after 9/11, like when we were living in Texas, my mom's boyfriend at the time was a conspiracy theorist.
Oh boy.
About like George W. Bush like doing all of it and like everything that like led up to it, and looking for like the signs and all that kind of shit. And I remember going to like protests and like gatherings and stuff because I was like 8. Not go. And I remember them like having little stands like telling you how to like prep for stuff and like where to hide things, like how to build like shelters and all kinds of shit. I guess I had forgotten that, like, brought up because it like popped into my head and I was like, oh yeah, I lived through that part.
Yeah, and all those conspiracy theories and all that stuff. I mean, we still see the remnants and the connections with all that stuff today with QAnon and conspiracy theories surrounding 9/11 and everything else. Like it all has a history. It all started somewhere. Like that stuff can just get brought up, you know, out of thin air somewhere. And I mean, I think the one thing that like got passed down to like a lot of other places around the country when it came to Oklahoma City bombing was having like those big, huge planters or pillars in front of all the federal buildings. I mean, going to UCLA, like we have like one of the federal buildings like right off of Wilshire Boulevard, and like seeing those like up and like they're just now part of the landscape now, but that wasn't that way before. But you know, after Timothy McVeigh decides to do what he does, it's one of those lasting sorts of things that happens when something major like that happens. And I can still remember the Oklahoma City bombing because me and my cousin had to walk home from school that day. And we got locked out of the house because she left her keys at home. But they always had like a radio outside, and so we just happened to turn on the radio so we could listen to music or whatever and wait for somebody to get home and do homework. And like it was all over the radio. And I can remember thinking like, damn, like what the hell does that look like? And I wanted somebody to hurry up and get home so I could actually see like if my ideas in my head actually matched what was on TV, and it was far worse. The TV was far, far worse. Like I still remember seeing like, I mean the paper scattered all over the place, like being able to look inside the federal building and see jackets in office buildings and that sort of thing. And I can remember them telling us that there was like a daycare center there, and it's just thinking like, holy shit, like how do we let this happen? And it's a lot of the same feelings that get brought up when we talk about 9/11 also, because I mean, it was a terrorist attack much in the same way.
I remember
only it was done by white nationalists, and that is why it gets ignored, because there have been multiple, and I mean there's connections to, you know, the white separatists. We have several, you know, I know there was a news story here in the last few weeks about them finding bodies on, you know, one of the compounds from one of the groups, but there are several in Oklahoma. And you know, McVeigh had connections to Elohim City. There have been a few bombings that have been stopped, plans that have been stopped in the meantime, also with connections to the same groups. But it's largely ignored and not aggressively pursued. But here we're still like 9/11 has been put on this pedestal, and I really feel like it's treated differently because of who those what is the word I'm looking for? I don't want to just use terrorists war, but
I mean they're extremists much in the same way that I mean
extremists, that's a good word.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And I mean imagine if America had done what it did to, you know, the Middle East and Muslim countries, if they had done that to white nationalism here in America. I mean, On September 11, 2001, 2,977 people died, not including the 19 terrorists. And as a response, we decided to raid the Middle East, and we fight a war on terror there for 20 years. That costs us $2 trillion, kills over 1 million people, displaces anywhere from like 50 to 60 million people from their homes. And here, I mean, we get terrorist attacks, and it's just like, oh, we'll put up some big huge planters and pillars in front of the federal buildings to make sure that if they do that, the blast won't radiate as much and won't kill as many people. And you know, I mean, you can't help but see the similarities between both of those events, and you also can't help but see the difference in the response to it in both ways.
Is that what the planters and pillars are for?
It's to keep you from getting any vehicle
because I'm
a certain distance.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know about the Oklahoma City bombing until like high school. Like nobody back home ever talked about it.
Yep.
I was I took a seminar called Death and Dying. Depressing class, but interesting. We had a woman that survived the bombing come and talk to us and like showed us pictures and stuff from that day. Traumatizing for the whole class to see like all of it because it was like uncensored pictures. So yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the reason why we get them.
So it's concerning because that white nationalism and particularly, Christian white Christian nationalism is really the biggest threat within this country, but it's downplayed so much.
Instead, we'd rather have people take off their shoes at an airport, or make sure that we only can carry 3 ounces of a clear liquid, or make sure we can't bring any food from outside, through security. Like that's the stuff that we're worried about. We're not worried about the homegrown terrorists that are in this country right now, actively plotting and speaking, like as we do this podcast, and all the fanfare and all the patriotism that surrounds 9/11 is misguided. I mean, people talk about like never forgetting, and like one of the things I like as I have like these day-long sort of like mini lessons with my students, so that way they understand that like history is made every day, and that way things like this are opportunities for them to learn and ask questions. I also put up like different tweets of different folks that for 9/11 it wasn't a time for bonding and unity, it was a time of terror for them. Tweets about a Muslim girl's dad, being beat up at work because, he wore a head wrap. And so after that, he took his head wrap off, never put it back on again. Or a 9-year-old kid having his parents ask him if he wanted to change his name because his name was Osama. Like a 9-year-old having to make that choice at that point in time because he can't walk around, the United States with a name like that. Or another lady, she said that she was a freshman in one of her college classes, and her teacher asking her to leave because, they wanted a safe space for the other students to process their grief, in a way that would be okay for them and might be threatening to her. I mean, the jailing of Islamic folks that, their only crime was that they looked a certain way in America, in New York, and being detained much in the same way that the Japanese were during internment camps. And so we celebrate all this stuff.
I was legitimately concerned that we were going, as the fallout from 9/11 was happening and all the rhetoric we were hearing, I was legitimately concerned that we were headed towards them setting up internment camps.
Oh, I would imagine that that's probably something that they wanted to do. And the only reason why it didn't happen is because it was the 21st century. But I can only imagine the types of conversations government officials had about what they should do. I mean, everybody was on heightened alert back then. And, and I don't think, and the bad part is, I don't think most Americans would have blamed them for doing it, which is scary. Like, if that's what it takes in order to get people here to completely fear for, their safety, and that will allow the government to do whatever the hell it wants, regardless of whether it violates somebody else's civil rights, which all these people that they were, housing and jailing were American citizens just like they were. But I mean, a part of that is the history of this country. Again, it's not like we've never seen it before. And I mean, again, we talk about never forget, but there are certain things about that day and the ramifications of it that we shouldn't forget. Like, damn the American flag tattoos and damn the playing of the national anthem before sports games and all that other stuff. Like, it was a shitty time for a lot of Americans.
Yeah.
And we had an opportunity to be better, and we decided not to. And instead, we decided to, take our asses to the Middle East and go to Afghanistan and fight a war for 20 years that just ended while these kids are now alive. Like, these kids have lived in a world in which it's post 9/11 and in a world in which America has been perpetually at war for 2 decades. Like, and and again, we kind of sweep that stuff underneath the rug too. Like, we spent $2 trillion in Afghanistan in 20 years, and like, doing the math of it, it averages out to $32 million an hour for 20 years. Like, what could we have done in America with $2 trillion besides, fighting that battle over there to not even win it, and to basically, end up giving Afghanistan back to the people that we were trying to protect it from, supposedly.
Supposedly.
Yeah, but what sorts of social programs and safety nets could we have with $2 trillion? And to give it an idea of like how much a trillion is, because all we know is 12 zeros. I told my kids that like a million seconds is like 11 days, and a billion seconds is like 31 years or something like that, and a trillion seconds is like 31,000 years. Wow. And we spent $2 trillion fighting a war that was impossible to win. But God bless America.
Wrap my head.
Right. America.
Yay.
The other crazy thing about that time was Rudy Giuliani. Like, can you imagine if we'd had a presidential election that year, or even the year after that? Like, that dude he was the most popular person, most beloved person in America. Like, he would have walked into the White House without 1 ounce or $1 spent for, publicity or campaigning or whatever. Like, he would have walked into the White House. Every person in America would have voted for that dude for president. Thank God it happened in 2001 and not in 2000 or 2004, because it would have easily been, his time to be the next president. And look at that dude now.
That's a good point, though. I hadn't thought about that. Ugh.
Yeah.
I mean, not that the Cheney administration was great, but
no, not at all.
Giuliani either.
But Rudy Giuliani, I mean, especially knowing what we know about that dude today, like,
right,
he would have walked into the presidency without spending $1 for campaigning. He could have just put his name on the ballot and won in a landslide. But yeah,
that's terrifying. I'm gonna have nightmares now. Thanks.
I didn't do it.
American history is just one big nightmare.
It is.
It's like me to hear it from like y'all's perspective, because y'all like remember it and I don't. So it's like, it's interesting to hear like what people actually were thinking like when it happened, because I was like, what's for lunch? Like, something sad happened. I don't know like what to do. I'm 8.
Said, what's for lunch?
Well, what I have found interesting is, I have kids. The spacing of my kids are, I have a 10-year-old through a 21-year-old. And so the older ones, like, they don't, of course, they've never lived pre 9/11, but it was still close enough, in those last handful of years after. So they remember hearing about the actual attack and all of that. The 10-year-old, and his cousins that are around that age, they don't even know what it was. Like, they don't even know that what the Twin Towers were, that this attack happened. They don't know any of that. And so they're like, why does everybody keep talking about 9/11? Why are there so many flags up today? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
So they're very confused.
Because I remember it happening, and I remember like watching it on the TV because I thought that was a good idea for second graders to put that on TV for us to watch. We had to go outside and pray for them as a class.
Oh God.
Whole different story. But like, I guess it just never like processed like the same way it would have if I was already an adult or like a teenager. I don't know.
Yeah, and those were also like in the early days of the internet, so there wasn't a whole lot of stuff out there, and like we got pretty much any bit of news that we got was from like newscasts and all that sort of stuff, and we know the sorts of slants that they can put on things, and like they really did like prop up and promote a very, you know, patriotism sort of like themed covering of all of it. I mean, even like remarking on the idea that, you know, that like evil has found us, and I remember like that I can't remember who it was, but it was one lady on one of those newscasts talking about how evil has found us. And at that point in time, like as a teenager, like I didn't know much of that stuff and what she meant. I mean, I liked history and was learning it, but I didn't have teachers that could have those sorts of conversations. But to know, like, even in retaliation, all the sorts of like mini 9/11 we have enacted on other people around the globe all the time that never makes it into the news because it would be a bad look for all of us. I mean, and then now the advent of drones and all that other stuff, like we get to go ahead and terrorize folks day in and day out, you know, people that had nothing to do with 9/11, and yet and still like we are still bombing their towns and bombing their cities and bombing their countries over some shit that they didn't do. I mean, I asked my kids, like, y'all don't even know what it's like, and I can't even fathom or imagine, you know, what it would be like to have to walk around every day not knowing if you were going to get, you know, a missile dropped on you or a drone strike. You know, what that looks like, and that is the response that a lot of these Middle Eastern countries had to face because of what one group decided to do. It wasn't even a country, like it was a group of extremists. And again, like all the sort of stuff goes back to lived experience, and I can't imagine what prompted those folks to be so radical and extreme that they figured that was the only way that they could strike back out at America. But being a historian, I can only imagine. And while I'm not a fan of what they did, I can also, you know, think about why, and I can also think about exactly how we responded to it. I mean, over the last 20 years, the drone strikes that we've enacted on folks at weddings and hospitals and schools and all that other shit, like, why would a country not want to go ahead and retaliate back against us at some point in time? And we're going to call them evil? Because if that's the case, then we need to look in the goddamn mirror and see exactly what this country does. But
don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any of the uploads, be sure to turn on those notifications so you will know as soon as those go up. Also, like us on social media at Hypoxia Podcast, or the easiest way is to go to our website, hypoxia.com. That's HOPOKSIA.com. And the links to all the socials and all the podcast feeds are right there. And we just want to thank you all for sharing your time with us, hanging out with us, and we hope to spend more time with you in the future.